"Don't bark," she whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. "Just listen." The canine's ear twitched. His handler didn't hear her. He was busy scanning the crowd, adjusting his mirrored sunglasses, oblivious to the girl crouched low near the curb, her fingers trembling as they brushed the edge of the dog's padded vest. The summer heat hung thick over the town of Lakehurst, turning asphalt into something soft beneath boots and parade wheels. Drums thudded through the avenue in mechanical rhythm, echoing between red brick buildings and American flags stuck into flower pots. But none of that existed for the girl in the yellow hoodie. Her gaze was fixed only on the German Shepherd's face's amber eyes locked onto hers, steady and calm, but alert, like he understood something no one else did. The child didn't belong there. No parents nearby, no parade badge, no school group, no hat like the others. She'd slipped between bodies unnoticed, barefoot, knees scraped. Her name was Mara, though no one had asked. The town didn't know her. Not really. Officer Kane, the canine handler, shifted his stance and tapped the leash gently. "Let's move, Jet." The dog didn't flinch. His body was rigid now, like frozen mid-command. Kane looked down, puzzled. "What's gotten into you?" And then he saw her, kneeling too close. "Mara?" he asked, frowning, though he wasn't sure why he knew the name. Maybe because it didn't fit in his mouth, or because the girl was already standing, slowly, arms still low, like someone coaxing a wild animal. "Please," she said again, voice quieter now. "He remembers." Kane stepped forward, hand moving toward the girl's shoulder to guide her away, but Jet growled low. It wasn't aggression, it was warning, a protective hum from deep inside his chest. Kane froze. Behind them, the brass band hit a sour note as someone missed a step in the heat. A wave of confused murmurs rolled through the front rows of onlookers. The march had slowed slightly, just enough to cause that momentary hiccup in the tide of celebration, but the real disruption was still seconds away. The girl lifted one hand and pointed, not at Kane, not at the crowd, but toward the second row of soldiers about to pass the courthouse steps. "There," she said. Kane followed her finger, scanning faces, uniforms, hands. Everything looked normal, but Jet didn't. His hackles were rising now. His legs stiffened, his gaze narrowed, not wild, but exact. "Focused," Mara whispered again. One word this time. "Locker." And then Jet lunged. The leash strained hard. Kane's arm jerked sideways as the shepherd pulled with a force that startled even the officer who'd raised him from a pup. The dog veered away from the parade route, bolting past the town hall fountain, and straight toward a cluster of fold-out chairs set behind the veterans' platform. People screamed, assuming the worst, but Jet didn't attack. He didn't bark. He didn't knock anyone down. He ran to a trash bin, and then he sat perfectly still, facing it, watching it like it might breathe. Kane caught up in seconds. He'd seen this behavior before in training drills, in bomb threat exercises, in drills they used to laugh about because they never expected them to matter. But this wasn't a drill, and Jet wasn't bluffing. A wave of silence spread, like a ripple of cold air through the summer crowd. The band stopped. Flags paused mid-wave, and somewhere down the street a radio crackled, one of the marshals calling for backup, for bomb tech, for the perimeter to be cleared. The parade stopped, entirely, and no one noticed Mara was gone. Kane turned once, trying to spot her through the heads, the phones, the widening space around him, but the girl had vanished, as quietly as she'd arrived. No one else had even spoken her name. No one asked who she was, where she'd come from, or how she'd known. Only the dog stared at the bin, waiting, still and patient, inside the bin. Later, they'd find something. Not quite a bomb, but parts metal packed into a casing that could have gone wrong with one misplaced vibration. Police wouldn't say much. Just enough to thank the dog. Just enough to quiet the crowd. Just enough to keep the day going by afternoon, but Officer Kane couldn't forget her. The strange girl in the yellow hoodie, the one who had whispered and somehow made the dog remember something no one else had taught him. Because the truth was, Jet had known her once. Before his training, before the name Jet, before the shelter, and the rehab, and the uniform, Kane would search records. He'd go back through adoption forms, animal control visits, even call a woman in a nearby county who used to foster dogs with children in protective housing. He'd find one note, a scribbled line from 3 years ago. "Dog seems to respond best to Mara. No known family. Temporary placement only." Kane wouldn't sleep that night because now he wasn't sure who had rescued who, and he wasn't sure what else the girl had whispered. They searched for her for hours. After the parade disbanded and the bomb unit cleared the bin, they were quiet. Handshakes and forced laughter, reporters swarming like mosquitoes, and the mayor trying to turn it into a press opportunity. But Kane wasn't smiling. Not once. Not after he replayed the footage from the security camera posted near the hot dog stand across the street. It caught a single, grainy shot of Mara just before she vanished, turning her face slightly toward the camera, her hand resting one last time on Jet's back like she was saying goodbye. No one in law enforcement recognized her. No social worker claimed her. No one even knew where she'd come from. But Jet did, that night. Kane stayed late at the station reviewing older records, mostly out of instinct, not protocol. He pulled up Jet's intake file, years old now, from the local pound. One line, it stood out again and again. Unusually responsive to quiet voice commands. May have been trained or bonded before capture. Below that, a note added in faded pencil. Child may have been involved. Transient foster. Kane leaned back, rubbing his eyes. The idea seemed absurd. A child training a dog this precise. But then again, he hadn't taught Jet how to sit down at a trash bin and wait in absolute silence. That behavior wasn't part of his coursework. That had come from somewhere else. From someone else. Or maybe before someone else. The next morning, Kane returned to the same stretch of sidewalk where the girl had appeared. Jet walked beside him, leash loose, head turning left and right like he was tracking memories, not sense. His body was calm but searching, not urgent. Familiar. Then he stopped. It wasn't a dramatic halt, not like yesterday. He simply slowed, sat beside the base of a rusted street lamp, and looked toward the alley that curved behind a laundromat. Kane followed his gaze. Nothing there. Just cracked pavement and a sagging fence, but Jet stayed seated. Kane waited. 2 minutes passed, then 4, and then he heard it. A soft, dragging sound, something light being pulled across gravel. Then the smallest shift of color, yellow, tucked behind the edge of a torn billboard, just enough fabric showing to break the stillness. She stepped out slowly. No fear in her eyes, only disappointment. You left, she said quietly. He waited for you longer than you think. Kane opened his mouth but couldn't find the right shape for any sentence. The girl looked thinner in daylight, not in the fragile sense, but in a way that said she lived outside the frame of most people's. The schedules. She stood barefoot again, her toes black with dust, a fresh scrape on her cheek. Mara, he said finally, his voice almost an apology, but she didn't react to the name, like it belonged to someone else. His name was Dipper, she said softly, touching the side of the shepherd's neck where his old tag used to be. Before you gave him numbers and letters. Jet didn't move, but his tail thudded once on the sidewalk, slow, quiet. Knowing, how did you find that device yesterday? Kane asked, stepping closer. How did you know? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled something from the front pouch. Of her hoodie, crumpled paper, a child's drawing, years old and stained, a sketch of a dog, same coloring, same eyes, but beside the dog was a box, shaded in red, labeled bad smell. He used to find them when we were hiding, she said. Sometimes the shelters weren't safe. The boxes came first, then fire or yelling. Kane took the drawing from her gently, but his eyes kept drifting back to Jet. No Dipper. The way the dog sat now, still watching the girl, like every breath of hers was familiar, like he'd been waiting years for the sound of her voice again. And then Mara's hands clenched. There's another one, she whispered. I saw him leave it, not yesterday, last week. He had gloves, brown shoes like yours, but shinier. Kane's blood cooled where he asked. She didn't point this time. She just walked. Down the alley, past the gate, into a backlot where rain puddles sat stale and forgotten. Jet followed without a word of command, as if he'd never stopped being hers. Kane moved quickly behind them, his hand brushing the radio clipped to his chest. He didn't activate it yet. Not until he saw what she meant. Beside a pile of warped crates, hidden under a sun-faded top, was a green duffel bag, duct tape around the handles, unmarked to clean, and the smell like rust and battery and earth, too sharp to be ordinary. Jet didn't bark. He lay down and waited. The sidewalk had turned into a hush of held breath. Strollers backed away. Flags drooped still in waiting. Kane stood beside the bin, poles thudding behind his ear. Not from exertion but from knowing what might have been. Jet hadn't moved. Not a blink, not a twitch. He remained seated in that silent posture of warning, guarding the air itself. The bomb squad arrived 8 minutes later. They spoke in clipped tones, nodded at the officer, and got to work. The item wasn't explosive, not yet, but it was real. The casing was homemade, with wires and fragments packed into a metal pipe. In the wrong hands, with a spark, it would have torn through the first 3 rows of children. Kane stood there long after they cleared the scene. Reporters had already started circling. Parents were trying to comfort their kids with funnel cake and patriotic ribbons, pretending they hadn't just stood on the edge of something unspeakable. But Kane couldn't pretend. Not when the dog was still looking past him, toward the place where Mara had vanished. She had known somehow, not just about the bin but about Jet. The way she spoke to him, the tone, the command, not like a stranger, like someone who once mattered. Back at the station, Kane pulled the files again. Jet had been in the system under a different name, just like many dogs rescued from unstable homes or abandoned properties. His chip had been reset when training began, but something had survived in him, something raw, buried under obedience and drills. A memory that only answered to her voice. Kane traced it back to a temporary shelter in another state, more underfunded, mostly run by volunteers. One note stood out in the transfer report. Dog bonded to minor female, name listed as Mara, situation under investigation. No further information, no forwarding address, no case number. Just that single line, like a ghost wedged into paperwork. The parade made headlines the next day. Local news called Jet a hero. The mayor thanked the department. No one mentioned the girl, but Kane couldn't let it go. He printed the photo from the surveillance footage, grainy but clear enough to see her expression. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't lost. She looked determined, like she came for something only she could fix. Kane showed it to Jet. The dog sniffed it once, then sat down and whined low, soft, barely audible. The kind of sound that didn't come from duty, but memory. Kane hadn't heard that sound from him in 2 years. That night, he took Jet off duty and walked the outer blocks of town, the places cameras didn't reach, under the bridge near the reservoir, past the bus station where nobody loitered, down behind the rail yard. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for the feeling, that edge of an instinct that every good canine learns to trust. They didn't find her. Not that night. But they found the blanket, folded, dry, tucked beneath the bridge with an old metal collar beside it, the kind with a tag etched by hand. Lucky Jet sniffed it once and let out a short bark, not the sharp command bark, the other one, the one Kane had only ever heard when they ran into a trail from the past. The kind of bark that wasn't for alert, it was for recognition. "Was that your name?" Kane asked, crouching beside him. "Before they trained you?" The dog pawed at the blanket gently, like he was trying to uncover something invisible. Kane sat there for a long time, staring into the rippling water beneath the bridge. The street lights didn't reach this far, just the pale silver glint of moonlight dancing over ripples and silence. His hand rested on Jet's back, and for the first time since the parade, he wasn't thinking like a cop. He was thinking like someone trying to remember what it meant to belong to another soul. Next morning, Kane posted a notice in the only place he thought she might still look. No badge, no police seal, just a folded flyer taped to the side of the old shelter gate on 6th Street. To the girl in the yellow hoodie, he remembered. "Come back if you want to say goodbye or hello." And beneath it, one photo, Jet curled beside the collar she left behind 3 days past. And then on the 4th, just before sunrise, Jet barked once from the front porch. Kane stepped outside, and there she was. The town didn't go back to normal after that. How could it, even after the parade resumed marches, stiffly smiling, the band playing a lighter tune, the mayor awkwardly rejoining the microphone? People kept glancing over their shoulders. The bin where the canine had sat was now ringed in yellow tape, watched by 2 officers and a Homeland Security agent who'd been airlifted in that afternoon. Nobody knew what to say. The unease wasn't about what did happen, but what might have, if the girl hadn't whispered first. And still, no one could find her. Kane hadn't gone home. He'd stood beside Jet for hours. The shepherd was back in working posture, sitting tall beside the cruiser, but Kane could tell something had shifted. Jet had been trained to detect scents, but this wasn't about training anymore. This was memory, recognition, loyalty. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He hadn't told command yet, not the full truth. That the girl had said the word locker, that she'd pointed, that she'd touched Jet, like they shared something he couldn't explain. If it got out that a civilian, a child, had redirected a federal canine, there'd be questions, reviews, reprimands, but Kane didn't care. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Jet's whole body had responded, like a cord pulled tight the moment she'd spoken. It wasn't random though, so while the streets were clearing and officers gave statements and reporters snapped photos of the bin, Kane walked a block over to the precinct and pulled an old binder from the basement archive, the one marked Canine Rehabilitation Transfer 2022. Inside was a stack of profiles, dozens of dogs who hadn't made the first cut for duty. Too anxious, too old, too aggressive. Jet's file was near the middle, thick with redacted lines and inconsistent notes. Bite history, unknown trauma origin, found abandoned near a rail yard. One line in shaky cursive caught Kane's attention. Settles only around girl named Mara, otherwise panics near loud noises. He stared at it. Mara. Same name, same gentleness, same silence, and then a memory cracked open 2 years earlier. Before Jet had fully bonded, there was one visit to a county foster center for temperament pairing. Kane hadn't paid much attention, just another demo day. But he remembered the child. She hadn't spoken once, hadn't asked to pet the dogs or even step forward, just sat on the floor, hands on her knees, and waited. Jet had walked straight to her, lay down beside her feet, and slept for 20 minutes. It was the only time in those first months the dog had closed his eyes. They hadn't seen her again. After that, paperwork lost, transfer ended, and no one had asked for her until today. Back on the street, the sun dipped lower, turning the courthouse windows gold. Kane walked slowly, scanning every corner, his throat tight with questions he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. He wasn't even sure what he'd say if he found her. Why did you come back? How did you know? But she didn't return. Not during the cleanup. Not even as the town darkened and the last patrol cars circled with flashing blue. Jet's ears flicked, once, then twice. He stood up and Kane followed. The shepherd padded off the curb and across the road without hesitation. Nose low but tail relaxed, not alerting, not searching, remembering. He led them down an alley behind the bakery, through a gate left cracked open, and into the garden behind the old elementary school. The summer grass was tall, the swings creaked, and there she was. Mara sat cross-legged beside the broken fence post, picking at the end of a shoelace. She didn't look up when they approached. "You knew," Kane said, not loudly, not accusing, just stunned. She nodded once. "Did someone tell you?" he asked. Did you hear something?" "No," she said. Her voice was dry from the heat. "I just knew he would remember me." She finally looked up. "I heard the parade was coming here," she whispered, "so I waited. I thought he might forget me, but he didn't." Jet lay beside her again without a sound, as if nothing had passed between them but a pause in time. Kane didn't speak for a while. He sat down a few feet away, arms resting on his knees, watching this strange reunion in the shadow of a playground where no children played anymore. There was something in the way they sat, dog and girl, that made the world feel quieter than it had all day. "He doesn't forget the people who were kind," Kane finally said. "It's in him, even if we try to train over it." Mara nodded. "He used to sleep next to me when I had nightmares. No one else knew. He'd just come in and wait. And then, after a long silence, she added softly, I didn't want the bomb to hurt him." That was the twist Kane hadn't seen coming. Not really. It wasn't just about the people, the crowd, the parade. She'd whispered to protect him, and that changed everything. The sun was nearly gone by the time Kane drove them both back to the station. Mara sat quietly in the back seat, her face half lit by the orange spill of dusk. Jet lay beside her, head resting near her knees, every muscle relaxed in a way Kane hadn't seen since training. For a while, none of them spoke. The world outside. The cruiser passed in slow motion, empty lawns, porch lights flicking on, flags being taken down one by one. Lakehurst was settling down, but something in Kane's chest felt heavier, more awake than it had in years. Inside the precinct, no one questioned the girl. One officer nodded to Kane, eyes flicking to Mara and back. No reports were filed yet. No one from Homeland asked for a statement from her. It was as if they all knew instinctively that some truths don't belong in paperwork. Kane walked her to the break room, poured her a cup of water, and slid it across the table. Jet stood by her side, not out of duty, but choice. "Where have you been staying?" Kane asked gently, not wanting to break whatever fragile trust was holding them in the same room. "Nowhere," she said without blinking. "I walk, I sleep where it's quiet." He wanted to ask about social workers, case files, the broken foster system she'd clearly slipped through, but he didn't. The girl in front of him wasn't a statistic. She was the reason half the town hadn't ended up in a hospital today. "You could have run," he said. As soon as Jet reacted, "You could have disappeared, but you stayed." She looked up at that. "I didn't stay for them." Kane didn't to reply, but he understood that the silence stretched. Then she asked, "Will they take him away now?" Kane frowned. "Who?" "The ones who made him forget," she said. "The ones who gave him a number instead of a name." For a moment he didn't know how to answer. Then he leaned back in the chair and said, "He's not going anywhere. Not now." The next day, news broke across the region. K9 intercepts parade threat. German Shepherd alerts to suspicious device, but the headlines missed what mattered. They printed the handler's name. They printed Kane's face, but they didn't print Mara's. No photos, no interview, no credit. And yet, Jet's behavior had changed. He followed commands, sure, but his instincts had taken on something deeper. He scanned crowds not just with discipline but with memory. And once a week, quietly, Kane would take him out of uniform, drive to the edge of town, and wait beneath a willow tree near the edge of the abandoned school garden. Sometimes Mara would be there, sometimes she wouldn't, but whenever she was, Jet would rush forward before the car stopped moving, tail stiff with anticipation, heart forward like he was racing home. They didn't speak much after that first night. Words weren't necessary. Mara brought scraps, sometimes an apple core, a torn sock he used to play with. Jet never needed prompting. He'd lie beside her, watching the clouds until she stood and disappeared again into the spaces only children like her knew how to survive in. Months passed, fall came, then winter. The parade story faded beneath election news and fuel prices, but inside the precinct, one photo remained tacked to Kane's corkboard, a still frame from a security camera, grainy but clear enough. Jet sitting by the trash bin, unmoving. In the corner, barely visible, a streak of yellow from a child's HOODIE. No one ever asked about it. One night in December, Kane received a small envelope tucked into the station's front mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single note, in block handwriting, "Thank you for letting him stay who he is." Beneath it, drawing just pencil on folded paper of a dog curled around a girl's shoes. Jet sniffed the paper once, then licked it. Kane placed it back into the envelope and kept it in his desk drawer. Some stories don't get medals, some heroes never salute. But on a warm day the following June, when the parade resumed with tighter security and a new, safer route, Officer Kane stood once again beside his K9 partner. Jet's vest had been replaced with one less rigid, his name stitched on the side, not his number. Jet, just that. A dog who remembered and chose to listen when the world was too loud. And on the hill behind the crowd, half hidden by the trees, a girl in a clean blue jacket sat cross-legged, watching. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, but Jet saw her, and for a moment he paused, just long enough to catch her scent in the wind. Then he looked back at Kane, tail wagging once, steady and proud, and the march moved forward.